Reality back with you here today on a good old April Fool's Day to go over something that certainly seems like it should be an April Fool's joke. So today seemed like the appropriate day to bring this up, and I know this has come up on social media sites, hello Twitter, the last couple weeks or so, but I didn't really give it much thought, so I wasn't going to dive into it or anything. And finally I was like, you know what? I'm just going to see how stupid this argument actually is and take a look at this. So the the topic of today's ridiculous video is the whole "is coffee racist" situation argument thing that came up. So I did an internet search, and almost all the articles I came up with were things from years ago. As you can see, that this article is from July 30th of 2020. And I only started hearing about this like a couple of weeks ago. And again, I thought it was kind of a joke, and I was like, there's no way someone out there can actually be thinking that. And then I do this internet search, and it's like, oh no, all the results are from like 2019, 2020 mostly. And it was like, wow, okay, so people have actually been having this stupid conversation for 3 or 4 years at this point. But okay, I'll take a shot at it. And I haven't actually read this article yet, so let's see how far down the rabbit hole we're going to go here and how stupid things can get. So this is from Heifer International, again from July 30th of 2020. Article is called "Rooted in Racism, Coffee's Bitter Origins." Okay, so we're talking about the origins, not just like is coffee itself racist, which is just a dumb thing. So it says addressing systems of social, economic, and environmental oppression is intrinsic to Heifer International's work. As an organization, we strive to end hunger and poverty while caring for the earth. Okay, that actually seems fairly noble, but we must remember that poverty is not an accident. Debatable. When specific groups of people experience similar forms of socioeconomic marginalization, that is by design. Okay, that's also not happening anywhere in the United States, so thank you for that. In this series, we are exploring the intersection of historical racism and agricultural development, examining the impact on Black, Indigenous, and people of color to contextualize how hundreds of years of horrors, okay, there should be an oven there, not hundreds of years horrors, hundreds of years of horrors continue to shape and influence the lives of the families with whom we work. And I always like how I say people of color, and it's like, you know, white is a color. Hate to be the ones to break it to you. I do remember opening like the Crayola box as a kid, and there was a white crayon in there, but you know, hey, that's just me. So what does it say here? For many of us, coffee is essential. Full disclosure, I do not drink coffee, never really have. Love the smell of it, one of the best smells there is, but as for the taste, yeah, it just doesn't do anything for me. So sorry to all you coffee drinkers out there, I'm just not one of you. So this doesn't really affect me in any way, but I just still want to dive into this a little bit. So we can't imagine waking up without it, let alone navigating midday slumps or social catch-ups. I can. It helps forge connections and bring us closer to those we care about, stimulating our minds while creating moments of pure sensorial experience. As a nation, our collective love is growing practically by the minute, evidenced by the steadily increasing rise in cafes, roasters, bottled brands, and overall consumption over the last decade. Today, 64% of Americans drink coffee daily, tallying around 400 billion cups a year. That is a lot of coffee. So despite the bright spot coffee can be in our lives, it has a dark side. A sinister past that has spurred a troubling present. During centuries of global coffee production, a common theme has emerged: the oppression of people of color for profit. Okay, this hasn't happened. Okay, it might be happening in other places, but if you're just going to say it's just generally out there, you got to be looking at countries that are not in generally like the Western Hemisphere. You probably want to be looking at, you know, like the Middle East or, you know, China. For that sort of stuff, but I digress. As Christine A. Jones, don't know who that is, a professor of world languages and cultures at the University of Utah, put it, I think of coffee as one of those luxury commodities that illustrates the deep, profound juxtapositions of slave trade, human labor, to exploit the possibility of human luxury. Okay, you've been thinking about coffee a little too much. So, okay, we're going to go into the Atlantic slave trade, obviously a bad thing. 11 million Africans were captured and thrown onto slave ships, you know, usually sold by the Africans themselves. So it's not like there were just Europeans running in there and saying, you grabbing people and taking them on the ships. This is a lot of stuff that the Africans are going, hey, we're going to sell you because you're like a prisoner of ours to the white man. So just keep that in mind a little bit. This coffee is indigenous to Ethiopia. I did not know that. Where it still grows wild in ancient forests. Eventually, it made its way to the southern Arabian Peninsula. Okay, so we're getting a history lesson here. It is certain modern Yemen is where coffee was first commercially grown. Good for them. Okay, we're going into still a history of it. Okay, by the mid-1700s, other European powers of coffee's profitability. Yeah, demand soared where Dutch Indonesia could supply. All right, we know what the Dutch did over there. By 1788, half the world's coffee came from African slave labor in French-occupied Haiti. Conditions that were marked by a combination of torture, malnutrition. Okay, yep, probably true. The idea was to grow the crop as cheaply as possible at the expense of human life. I don't think they were really caring too much about human rights in 1788. Says, let's see here, the Portuguese colonized Brazil, quickly gained momentum as a leading coffee producer. And then in 1800s, Brazil accounted for 30% of the world's production of coffee. Okay, do we have, this is all of which was grown on the backs of 2 million people stolen from Africa. I doubt all of them did that, but okay. I mean, that's kind of an absolutist type statement that doesn't seem to have any sort of evidence backing it up, but okay. The average life expectancy of a coffee slave in Brazil was a mere 7 years. That's awful. Because it was widely acknowledged among plantation owners that importing new slaves after they died from overwork was cheaper than providing the necessary conditions for keeping them alive. Yeah, of course. This system lasted until 1888, 3 years after the United States legally abolished the practice of owning human beings. In Central America, okay, coffee depended on stolen land and work from indigenous peoples. Okay, yeah, so we know more about, bad Europeans, because of course this article was going to go into that. Let's see, coffee houses, stuff like that. Let's see, more than 600 years later, the system looks different on the surface, but shockingly little has changed. No, I'm going to go ahead right now without reading on any further and say I'm sure a real lot has changed. The whole there's not really slavery in the West. I'd say that's a change. You might want to mention that. Following in the legacy of colonialism, okay, people of color continue to be the industry's backbone, providing labor and wealth-generating coffee beans with little to no compensation. Okay, well, the poorer countries probably, there's a reason why they're not doing that. I mean, it sucks. I don't think there's any actual slaves. Again, I'm not basing that on anything, but I think we'd be hearing about that if there were actual slaves in the Western Hemisphere working on this stuff. I mean, again, if it's in the Middle East, which, we did mention Yemen before, that could definitely be the case, okay? But that is their problem, and it shouldn't be happening as far as I'm concerned. See, the gap between the haves and have-nots continue to widen in the coffee industry, with an apparent racial and ethnic divide separating the two. In 50 countries across Africa, South America, and Asia, okay, so 125 million people depend on coffee for their livelihoods. Of that group, 63% live in poverty, so a new one in extreme poverty. Yeah, I mean, it's just they're poorer countries, they have less money. Okay, so that doesn't really shore up the argument too much. Like, that's kind of just, unfortunately, a given. For small-scale coffee producers, those numbers are closer to 100%. Yeah. Virtually all are black, indigenous, and people of color. I'm sure that's pretty close to true. They toil among the flowering plants and before sunrise to well after sunset, carefully tending the crop to meet demands of even the most discerning pellets. So they're people but they're not slaves. I mean, okay, so if they're people that aren't white, okay, I mean, that's where a lot of folks that are not white happen to live. I mean, that's not really an argument to say, hey, in a place where there's mostly non-white people living, the non-white people are making coffee or tending the fields of coffee. Okay, what's your argument there? So it says everything is done by hand, from selecting only the most perfectly ripe cherry. Okay, then we talk about the forest and stuff and ecosystems. Okay, they paid pennies for the hard work. Yes, because they don't have the money. Okay, and often don't earn enough to cover the expense of producing the beans, let alone provide for the families. That stinks. Okay, they're financially worse off than they were 50 years ago. Probably blame Starbucks for that. This is what I'm going to go with. Sorry, Mom. The coffee prices in 2020 are more than 4 times less than they were in the early 1980s, which, when adjusting for inflation, would be as if the minimum wage of $3.35 back then were reduced to 83 cents today. It costs around $2.30 per pound just for producers to break even over the long term. And between $1.87 and $3.50 per pound to reach a living income, the net income needed to maintain a decent standard of living. As a result, households experience scarcity of nutritious food, inability to seek medical care, and failure to keep up with basic expenses. Children are increasingly pulled out of school due to lack of funds, and many families fall into the inescapable debt that costs them their farms and potentially lives. That sucks. And so continues an age-old approach of denying populations food, health, education, housing in order to stem their advancement. Okay, you came to that conclusion. All right. yeah, I'm still not really seeing what your argument is here, but okay. A more visible racial hierarchy permeates larger scale plantations. Farm owners tend to be of European descent. I'd like to see evidence of that. Again, in places where almost all of the population is not white. And even if they were of European descent, that doesn't automatically mean they're going to always be the plantation owners. I can guarantee you there are people working in the fields that are white. So I would, if just magically they all weren't, that would be weird. Okay. It says, while farm workers are largely represented, okay, by indigenous and ethnic minority groups, okay. These farm workers are grossly underpaid, usually far below national minimum wages. During harvest season, they spend nights sleeping 60 people deep on the floors of cramped, dirty rooms. That sucks. Latrines and showers are often unavailable. Yikes. So nearby fields and rivers are used instead. Let's see, lack of protective equipment against everything from venomous snakes. I don't know how you're going to protect, what kind of equipment you use to protect against venomous snakes. I'm saying that I legitimately just don't know. Let's see here. And poisonous pesticides are the norm, and clean drinking water is in short supply, unfortunately. Workers are often enslaved in all but name, forced to pay off debts through labor. Okay, so they're indentured servants, which is not exactly the same as slavery, but okay, so you're moving a goalpost here. Okay, it says on plantations with a permanent labor force, it's all too common to be both subjected to pittance wages. Okay, so like anybody else, and for a variety of reasons, cut off from local markets. Okay, employees, it says in quotes, are forced to purchase essentials at hugely inflated prices from an estate store, pushing them further into debt. It's not unusual for payment systems to be rigged through manipulated scales or mysteriously misplaced coffee during weighing. All this intentionally perpetuates indentured servitude. Okay, there you're actually using the word, so it's not slavery, different thing, as the workers are then forced to stay until they can pay back whatever was borrowed. Okay, and indentured servitude, even though it's illegal in the U.S. too, I'm almost positive that still happens here, and I'd be kind of surprised if it didn't. Let's see here. So it's not improving in Brazil. Okay, child labor. Yeah, we know that happens. That stinks. And in Brazil, it says, it says this is especially notable, remembering Brazil's history of slavery, which is the defining factor in ties to coffee domination. Remains the most influential producer of coffee in the world, reaping significant profits for large plantation owners and associated companies. And like the 1800s, these economic winners have noticeably darker skin than the farm workers. Okay, sure. For hundreds of years, little has changed for coffee producers. Today, wealthy North American and European companies profit off an exploited labor force, an issue we examine in addition to sharing ways to support coffee farmers in our follow-up piece. This thing here, okay. So this feels to me like someone decided to go, hey, there happen to be people that aren't white doing something that seems sort of like what slaves in the United States did 150 years ago. So it must be racism, as opposed to just that's who lives there. Oops, right click by accident. As opposed to like that's who lives there, and that just happens to be who's handling it. Okay, if you can actually provide any sort of citations here, of which I don't see a single one, saying about the populations of the people. There's absolutely nothing on any of their hyperlinks either. So yeah, you're not really providing much in the way of proof other than I'm trying to link something that's happening now to something that happened back then, but they don't really have a connection, but I'm just going to link them and say that they're related. Thank you. Yeah, I just don't see it. This is a dumb article. It's a dumb thing. Leftists, not everything is racism. I know. You're thinking, but yes, everything is. No, it really isn't. Okay? Coffee is not racist. You're just a dumbass for thinking that it is. Let me know what you think about this, everybody. I'm done. I am going to go cleanse my brain somehow. Hope you have a happy April Fool's Day. Hope nobody played a stupid prank on you, but please like, share, and subscribe. Talk to you soon. Bye.